Like Carla Johnson and her family, Anthony Hunt and his wife admired older homes and were happy to find one when Anthony took a new job in northern Indiana.
We moved in and we're in the process of making some of the changes. My wife took our then one-year-old son Silas to the Elkhart Health Department, and they said while he was getting his one-year shots, hey, we happen to have a free lead test. Would you like to do that? And my wife said, sure. Well, he failed the test, which came as a complete shock to us. They said, well, wash his hands clearly, keep an eye on what he's eating, and come back in a couple months. We did. He failed again.
An investigation by the health department revealed what would become a nightmare for the Hunts and their boys. Their home had been painted inside and out, top to bottom, with toxic lead paint. Aluminum siding covered the badly peeling paint on the home's exterior, but before the siding had been installed, lead had leached off the house into the surrounding soil. All of the painted surfaces inside their house, even the cabinet where they stored their toothbrushes, were contaminated. Even the dirt at the curb contained high levels of lead, thanks to cars using leaded gasoline traveling their busy street for decade upon decade.
I mean, there's 30 windows in the house. It's two stories. It's not huge, but all of a sudden we can't use any of them to open and close and get a nice breeze when there's one there, because you can't have lead paint on lead paint, or you reintroduce the whole problem that you've been trying so hard to keep clean and out of the house.
When they bought the house, the Hunts had 3 boys under the age of 7. Now they have another baby boy and a heightened awareness of lead that brings daily anxiety.
As we started to do some corrections, then again one-year-old Silas started getting worse, because obviously you're disturbing much of what would otherwise be the lead. It turned out that much of the porches were in horrid condition in terms of lead. They were more than 10 times what should be the normal limit for any kind of lead paint. All of the trim in this room, so the door along the top, and here the baseboard, is all lead paint. This is a room that we have gone through, and while there is lead paint over here, it is now at least contained in new paint, a new coating all the way around, so we at least feel safe about having the kids inside. This is the alligator ring that you see, and that is the telltale sign of real lead paint. In fact, it is lead paint from likely 30 years ago, still the same coat. That's why you see the endurance for lead paint holds up so well, and many people are so reluctant to give it up.
Anthony has already used a large portion of his retirement account to create a better living environment for his family. But allowing the county to put another lien on his home to pay for repairs would put the Hunts upside down on their mortgage. Since the house is essentially unsellable, they've decided to work through each project as they can, paying as they go. Anthony and his wife now do all they can to educate others about the dangers of lead paint. With Indiana ranking so high among states with homes containing lead paint and an estimated 13,000 affected children, the Hunts would like to see more funding dedicated to the problem, but they aren't holding out much hope for that. Silas's lead poisoning is under control, as is the mild poisoning experienced by his brothers. The baby will soon be tested for the first time. But for Anthony and Carolyn Hunt, one concern will never, ever go away.
The nights that you're awake staring at the lead-poisoned ceiling, thinking that the house is sort of there to attack you because all 3 of your kids have some level of lead poisoning. And now you face the question pretty much all the time of, are they behaving that way because of the lead poisoning, or is it really that they're just being kids? And now you have to, you'll never know the correct answer on that one.
What I think is particularly sad for me about this situation is that was the 3rd house I'd worked on and had been aware of lead paint issues in houses of that age for 15 years when I got there. It's not as though I didn't have a sense for the potential dangers in the house, but I had gone through that in each of the other houses and tested them, and the levels weren't high, and had the kids tested, and so it was one of those had dealt with the dangers, and they didn't feel very real to me.
Bill Osterly's daughter Emma was lead poisoned during a renovation of a previous home. A neighbor who was also a pediatrician expressed concern during the renovation of the Osterly's older dwelling at the time, which involved tearing out walls.
I could tell she was just kind of worried, you know, about the work, and I would talk to her all the time. And she brought over an article one day that essentially said, you know, there's been this migration of lead poisoning to more affluent families doing remodeling projects, which I'd also sort of read about before.
Emma's own pediatrician had once declined to test her for lead, but agreed when asked a second time. The test showed little Emma had moderate lead poisoning. She was only a year old.
It was this agonizing going back to the doctor, worrying about her lead levels, and they wouldn't move, or they would have moved just the slightest bit, and so there's no effective sort of abatement treatment for the child. And that was simultaneous with the news about the potential effects getting worse. It was awful. I mean, it was the intense sense of sort of guilt and concern was just awful. I wouldn't wish it on anybody.
Much like the Hunt children, Emma is now doing well and on par with her peers. But for her parents, worries linger.
A good example of she had a little bit of a learning disability in first grade, and that's one of the potential. Lots of kids have little learning disabilities, but sometimes lead causes little learning disabilities, and we just felt awful. I mean, we just felt we may have caused this.
As a parent of an older lead-poisoned child, I really think, and as someone who works in the industry, I think that that it's real important to focus, not to forget that the children do get older than 6. They age, and the effects of lead poisoning will follow them through their life. There's a lot of focus on the children once, you know, identifying them when they're young and making sure that the parent knows so that, you know, you can remove them from the lead source. And then there seems to be this disconnect, and the children are forgotten almost. And so I don't think that we need to forget that the older children still suffer the effects of lead poisoning.
While many children have been exposed to some level of lead poisoning through paint over the decades, the problem is especially critical now as those paints deteriorate even more. But you can live safely in homes containing lead paint.
I am a lover of old homes, and I would never tell someone not to live in an old home. What they need to do is just be aware of what they're looking for. Have a lead inspection done so that you know where the lead is. If you don't know where it is, you don't know what to look for when it starts to deteriorate. But what I like to tell people is that the fixes for lead in the home are not so daunting that they should abandon all hope.
It's not that you have to be scared of your house or shouldn't be. It's that you certainly need to be addressing the possibilities if in fact you live in homes built before 1978.
Osterly remembers the familiar warnings that children in low-income neighborhoods filled with peeling paint were at the greatest risk for lead poisoning. Now there is an additional threat.
It's demolition and remodeling, because you vaporize, you get a lot of dust, and it's directly ingestible, which is likely what happened with us. The first step is always get your paint tested. Always. If you're bringing a painter in, you can insist that they use lead-safe practices. And if they don't know what that means, you ought to consider looking for another painter. Put some responsibility on your contractors. They should know what they're doing.